Simwood.com for their support. Simwood's API can turn any programmer into a telco. OnSIP.com for our hosted PBX. That's what we use, and that's what I've used for my company for several years. Would also like to thank David Frankel and ZipDX.com, which is a full-color, full-featured HD audio conference bridge. Our local rate dial-ins are provided to us by Voxbone, Voxbone.com. If you need DIDs, that's where you want to go. If you like the technology of IP and IP communications, join us on the community at Google+. You can go to vuc.me/community for that. And while we're throwing around URLs, vuc.me/IRC will get you on the text back channel so you can talk to people and say mean stuff about me, but of course don't forget I can read the IRC channel too. And finally, I hope to see everybody at Astricon. We're having a VUC dinner. It should be great. See you there. Astricon.net for more information. All right, and all that said, speaking of Astricon, we've got a couple of people from Digium, notably Mr. Matt Jordan. We appreciate your coming by. We'll be talking to him a little bit later, but feel free to interject. Also, guys on the IRC, guys and gals, if there are any, you have comments while we're talking to, first of all, our main guest, who is Francesco Prior. Welcome.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
It's great to, yeah, good morning, because you're like 5 hours earlier. You're actually in the same time as Huntsville, are you not?
Good afternoon, it's better.
No, but I think you're the same time zone as Huntsville.
Here it's 1 p.m.
Yeah, that's funny. Oh, it's 1 p.m. All right. Detail. It's 6
PM,
here. Yes. The sun is well over the yard arm, and that means it's time for beverages on this end of the side of the Atlantic. So the Brits are still on the tea, I think. Was that the case, Andy?
Sorry, just amusing. Yeah, it's probably more like the Coke, as in Coca-Cola, this afternoon at the moment. Actually, haven't had anything for a while, but yeah, another cup of tea first.
Okay. Other than our principal guests, we also have a pair of Dans, Dan Lane from TruePhone, and the other Dan, we'll call him Dan Jenkins. Dan, we'll be seeing you at Astricon as well.
Yeah, you will be.
Mr. James Bodie is with us. Ken, who is a particular expert on Asterisk, all things Asterisk, is with us. Ken Rice. Peter Dunkley, Mr. WebRTC, is with us. And yours truly, Randy. Let's get the intro. Francesco, you and I have spoken a little bit, but I don't know where you actually, I believe you come from Italy, but tell us a little bit about how you got into the technology of telephony and how you got into the Asterisk world, please.
Yeah. So first of all, I set the Italian flag because I'm Italian, but 6 years I'm living from here, and I've knew Asterisk a few years ago, 5 years ago, and in the last 2 years I've learned more and more about this application. And 2 years ago I've certified the CAP, and last year I've took part of us for my first time.
And this will be your first time presenting? Or was last year your first time?
Second
time. So what did you present on last year, just out of curiosity? Because I don't remember seeing you there.
Yes, the title of speech is Asterisk and Database. And this year I decided to prepare a tutorial session to give back some knowledge to the community, because I've received a good knowledge from different sources in last year. And first of all, I would say thank you to the Definitive Guide team, because I think I define this book the Asterisk Bible, because it helped me a lot for the exam, the CAP certification.
Did you find that make a lot of interesting contacts when you're meeting people in person? When you met, going to Astricon, you meet people in person. So have you communicated? I mean, did that bring anything to the mix for you?
Yes, from last year I stay in contact with Leif, with you. I don't know if you remember me from last year.
I remember meeting you last year. Actually, didn't you give a talk on Chandongle last year, if I recall correctly?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
very good talk.
I saw you at the end of the hall, and it was a experience. During last year, many people contact me for install Chandongle, and actually in a company we are using 6 dongles to receive calls, mobile calls, and SMS, and doing SMS campaigns.
Very cool.
Yes, and yeah, as new, I would to start this talk saying that I'm very happy, and because it's a professional happiness, because September and October are coming with a big surprise for me, and I would be publicly thanked. First of all, I've changed my work. I lived as employed. I'm no longer employed, and a few weeks ago I decided to do a turn in my life, and actually I'm working at home with some noise, with strange times, but I'm very happy to stay more with my sons, and I'm free now to accept new challenges, always in Asterisk fields.
Oh, excellent. Well, that's very good.
Yeah, and in second point, as David has wrote in Digium blog, October is the month of VoIP. Do you know? Because October will start with Astricon in Atlanta, and then we'll continue a week later with the Elastics World in Mexico City. And I'm very excited because I'll be speaker in both conferences with David and Mark, and it's a shame that I cannot fly with them.
Now, are you going to do the same presentation at both Astricon and at Elastics World?
No, in Elastics World I'll show a renewed Asterix dongle presentation.
Very cool.
Yes.
So, given your presentation on Chain Dongle last year at Astricon, over the past year, what has been the development in Chain Dongle? What new things have been improved upon in that particular channel driver?
I have noise in the communication. Can you repeat the questions?
Yeah, so last year you had a really good presentation on Chain Dongle and the kinds of things you can do with it. What has changed or improved in Chain Dongle over the past year?
In the source code, nothing has changed. The version is the same. A developer has prepared a Chain Dongle module for Asterisk 11, so you can use the same module in Asterisk 11, and change in this version.
A little bit, a little packet loss here. I'm not sure whether you're live or you still with us, Francesco?
Yes.
We missed. Okay, we missed the last part of that. That's good though, because the question came out of which version of Asterisk you were talking about. Because Matt's here to talk about 12, I think, or will be. But or am I crazy? Does that smile mean that I'm?
No, you're not crazy. That's
okay.
Just after 12.
And I mean, we will be. I promise you, we'll get to. But the question was when, actually, Francesco, the Asterisk version that you are going to be talking about at Astricon with your database presentation. What version is this working with?
The presentation is working on Asterisk 11, but Asterisk could work with databases and the ODBC layer from I think 1.8 or 1.6 version. I think Matt can respond these questions.
Yeah, and before he does, let me ask you a question. Let me add my question to that, Matt, which is that in my day, which was 1.2, basically, you know, I understood the point of connecting to a database. Just to back up for people who are maybe not all that familiar with this universe, by the way, the old versions of Asterisk that I know came with a database, sort of a B tree. I don't even know what that's called, but it was a persistent data, so that if you had stuff you needed to save, this stuff would be good over a reboot. But this was not a relational database. This is just a B tree lookup, very handy. And so far, have I told the truth or not, Matt?
You have told the truth up until Asterisk 10.
Okay, take us from 10. That's a great point rather than me blithering on. But that's kind of what I saw. And I did use the MySQL. There's MySQL. I don't know if it's an app or a function anymore, but the point is you could call it, and it was very easy to do. And I did use that for other things. But take us from 10, the big change there, and then we'll hear more about what's now.
So when we talk about databases in Asterisk, there's always sort of two layers. There's the databases that I think most people are referring to when they say databases with Asterisk, which is probably more, I think, what Francesco is relating to as well, which is I have a large production database backend that maybe is already used by certain aspects of my business, and I want to integrate Asterisk with that. I want to store data from my PBX in that database. And that database could be used by multiple Asterisk instances. It could be used by various systems, and that allows your DB admin to be able to manipulate the data and tie data together between both your communications infrastructure as well as other systems. And so when people talk about database integration with Asterisk, I think that's probably what they're usually referring to. So Asterisk, much like many other products, integrates well with a whole variety of different databases. We focus pretty heavily on the ODBC connections because it keeps us fairly agnostic, but there's native drivers as well for both MySQL and PostgreSQL. People certainly integrate Asterisk with Oracle and even Microsoft SQL Server for some ungodly reason. So that's a whole different layer of kinds of things going on. Internally to Asterisk, Asterisk also has its own database that comes with Asterisk. And up until version 10, that was a Berkeley database, version 1.0 for licensing restriction reasons. And in Asterisk 10, we moved to SQLite 3, which is technically a relational database, but we really still just mostly use it for kind of a key value pair type of thing. And the purpose of that database that lives on the same machine as Asterisk running is to store data that persists across reloads, across restarts, but it's really an internal mechanism. But you can still, you know, access that data through the dial plan, through AGIs, through various other interfaces. But it's very tightly coupled with the Asterisk process running on that box. It's not meant for the kinds of database integration scenarios that people probably traditionally think of when they talk about that subject.
And I think the important thing, at least to me, back in the day when I was actually working with this stuff, is this idea of persistent. Because whatever you do in your dial plan, whatever flags you set, whatever mischief you get up to, is not going to be persistent over a reboot. So the big deal of the original database was to be able to look stuff up. For example, I remember we had a thing where we wanted to shunt numbers, incoming phone numbers, over to different extensions. But I wanted to be able to control that by just saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. We use some kind of a simple IVR thing to do that locally. But if the box rebooted for any reason, then that had to be loaded from a database. If we didn't keep that information someplace, basically it ends up in a file, obviously, then when you reboot or when you change, you update, or you make any changes, you've lost that. So that was the original thing. And what you're just saying, Matt, is, of course, that you're going a lot further in talking of business logic and things that, talking to your stock, you know, inventory and stuff like that, which is much more sophisticated. Let's get back to Francesco to find out what kinds of use cases, Francesco, what kinds of things are you illustrating, are you showing in what you're doing in your Astricon presentation with the database?
Yeah.
What kind of tasks would we do?
in first place, my plan is my plan is pass an idea at Astricon for people that hasn't used yet Asterisk and database. The idea I want to pass is that Asterisk is very cool, but if we connect it to a database, it will become powerful. And as you say, there are many examples for explain the powerful of this couple. For example, I want to share that in Argentina, we call usually we call taxi from home. Actually, you call the number of taxi, and you need to say three things each time: your name, your address, and thank you. But in this scenario, with Asterisk and database, we can prepare an automatic application that, when we receive a call, can detect caller ID, cross it with a phone book information, and then detect your name and address and save a speech like, "Hi, a taxi will arrive in a flash," with Alison Smith voice, Spanish edition. And another example is, for example, a boss in a company likes Asterisk, but he doesn't know how to install, configure, or change configuration files. Nevertheless, he wants to take control of the system by himself. So we can, with Asterisk and database, we can prepare an environment or prepare a simple PHP web GUI and permit to the boss update or create, add, or remove, for example, zip extension or dial plan functions without accessing to black command line. This is possible for the real-time architectures that permit, as you said, save all configuration files into a database table.
So are you going to be doing any live demos, or is this your presentation going to be slides, or how's that going to play out?
I'm thinking about that in these days. I've prepared some slide, and I think to prepare something practical or a practical example to show and interact with the community.
Okay, as we, a common friend to most of us on the call, Tim Panton, who does the most dangerous demos. If James is listening, he'll get a chuckle out of that. And we're hoping to see some of those. Also, you might take a page from Mark Spencer's book and be working on the slides for your presentation like 3 hours before, when everybody else is partying, or the night before, 4 hours before, man?
I think actually probably close to 5 minutes before.
Oh, 5 minutes before. Maybe that's yeah. I mean, they came looking for him to do a keynote or something. I remember this. I was sitting there, and they found him, and he was in the bar writing his. I don't know. Anyway, Mark's a great guy, and for those of you listening, if you get to Astricon, one of the greatest pleasures is meeting Mark and the gang. And if you have to deal with Matt and talk to him, he's kind of a fun guy too. I'd like to break for any questions here on anything to do with either Francesco's presentation or Astricon. We have a huge crowd in the Hangout, by the way, and if anyone of you have any comments, go ahead. But if anybody's in IRC, you can just type away. I'm looking right now. And M. Jordan is in the room, I see. Just joined. Anybody?
I've got a question.
Dan Jenkins, go.
Yes.
So how difficult have you found it kind of getting up to speed with databases within Asterisk, and have you really found much of a limitation on what you can do? I haven't really played around with them too much, but I can imagine the power they give you.
That question is for Francesco, I assume, or for anybody.
Francesco.
So Francesco,
Francesco, Matt, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say also, well, Matt hasn't found any limitations. That's the problem. But Francesco, have you found, it's a good question actually, do you find there's limitations? And here's the great place to talk about them if you do. What are the limitations that you've run into with trying to use a relational database?
At the moment, I haven't used hard this connection, this scenario. I did some tests. I'm using with a customer a dynamic real plan. A dynamic deal plan. I know that we can use database with a cluster of Asterisk, but I haven't yet do any project of this type. I hope one day test database with a bigger environment.
This sounds like a good time to ask Matt if there's anything database specific that is coming down the pipe. By the way, hello, Asterisk 12, but there may not be any changes. I don't know.
There is.
Specific to database. Oh, great.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah, wait a minute.
Okay, it's partially based on what Carl Pfeiffer's actually said in RC at the second, which is that how are you connecting to the database? Which databases are we talking about here? Are we talking about the internal database? Are we talking about ODBC connections to any database? Or are we talking about the inbuilt MySQL connections?
And Carl mentions Postgres, and I know that works.
Is for me the questions?
Yes.
I have.
Yes.
Okay. I'll use ODBC connection, and in my speech I start showing how to install MySQL server, for example, with.
Oops. Looks like the database disconnected there. Well, it's good time to get to what I was asking you, Matt, about anything brand new, and then we'll move back. See, Michael's joined too. Matt. So we were going to talk about anything new that's specifically related to databases, if you want to.
Sure. So this is really bleeding edge. We actually have not talked about it much in any of the sort of blog posts or other communications about what's been done in Asterisk 12, because right now sort of the focus of this particular framework that got developed in Asterisk 12 has really been for use with the new PJSIP SIP stack. But it's been hugely helpful in terms of that development, and there's some interesting things that you can do with it, and it is at least tangentially related to the notion of integrating Asterisk with databases. So if you think about the reason why you integrate Asterisk with a database is because you want to have some sort of data abstraction persistence layer in your architecture. I don't want the data to just live in the Asterisk memory or in the Asterisk file system or somewhere on the box, but I want to have a hierarchy of my important long-term data being stored on a database someplace. But then I also have a database internal to Asterisk, which stores important data that is co-resident to that particular instance of Asterisk. And then, of course, you've got other things where data gets stored in an application in memory, in caches, and various other kinds of things. So one of the problems that we've been facing, and we really tackled this actually in Asterisk 11, or at least began to tackle this in Asterisk 11, was the notion that when you do a reload operation in Asterisk, sometimes it's a little bit more volatile than anybody really wanted. We spent a lot of time, and actually Terry Wilson spent a lot of time working on a framework that actually would make reload operations atomic, so that whatever operations were currently in flight and currently operating on data had that same set of data for their lifetime of that operation, but any subsequent operations would use the new configuration data. And Josh kind of took that and ran with that. So what came out of that in Asterisk 12 is something that Josh called sorcery, because it's sort of magical. And if you're familiar with data relational mappers in other languages like Java or C# or some of those other nice fancy languages, it's sort of a object relational mapper for C. And what that lets you do, though, is it actually lets you dynamically, from the configuration, define a abstraction layer for your instance of Asterisk. What that means is you can say, okay, I have a SIP endpoint. That's great. That's pretty cool. It's in PJ-SIP. It's in the new SIP stack. And I want to persist that out to a database. But that's my last line of data defense. That's where I wanted to go look for that endpoint at the last instance, because it takes a while to go out to a database and get the information. Well, internally, I also want to cache that in the ASDB. And so I'll configure my sorcery layers to have one layer of data to go get it out of the my MySQL database using the Asterisk real-time architecture. And above that, though, I want it first to check in the ASDB. And above that, I want to check it in memory. And so depending upon your configuration, you can actually define your own cache hierarchy for your particular instance of Asterisk. It's not supported everywhere. It's primarily, at this point in time, just supported for the PJ-SIP SIP stack. But it is something that is kind of interesting and has some interesting avenues for future development for future developers of Asterisk, because it's a very, as an engine for integrating data layers, it has a lot of interesting potential to treat anything as a data source. And to plug any kind of thing into this hierarchy as to where Asterisk should go look for the data that's being requested.
Are many people, oops, here we go, and Francesco's back with us. We'll pass it over to him in a minute. You're back. Matt, are many people or many installations, is it common to talk to a, you say MySQL, I say MySQL, I'm sorry, that's the way I was brought up.
You're probably right.
But anyway, I liked your comment on SQL Server, though. I couldn't agree more on that one. Why would anybody? But anyway, the question was really, is it common to call a MySQL server that is not in the same location, so remote MySQL server, or any other servers for that matter? How common is it to be talking over the internet to your management, some other city, for example, or some other, not on an intranet, in other words, or not on local? Is it common?
I'm not entirely sure, actually. I think there's probably some other people who would probably be a little bit more familiar with those kind of deployment scenarios. What I would say is common, though, is to not run your databases on your Asterisk server, right? And at the point where Asterisk is going out over any network to go hit that database, from its perspective, how far that length is pretty much an unknown quantity. And it is certainly common, however, to have multiple Asterisk instances using a shared database for their persistent data storage. I mean, that's a very, I'd say anybody running a very large installation is going to be doing that.
Isn't that the way registration information is stored, actually, most commonly, for large installations?
Yeah, absolutely. Registration information, but you could even also, if I was actually doing some form of, if I had a multi-tenant system, I would certainly want to be storing just my basic configuration information for my SIP endpoints, for those kinds of things, in a database. If nothing else, it's certainly easier than trying to deploy static comp files all over the system and trying to manage that. It provides that configuration information in one cohesive location.
Right. Let's see if anybody else has a comment either on my question, which was, is anybody talking to some remote server on the other side of the globe? Just as a parenthesis, I have a customer who has a server in China, and they're dealing with a mailing list. It's a silly thing. It's just it's a little bit of something in a database. And as you can imagine, it's actually not that simple a problem to worry about sending data back and forth from China. Let me just put one little thought in everybody's head, which is that, who knows who's over in China talking to your machine in the United States. So right there's a little bit of a, how are we going to do this thing, and how are we going to sync this stuff up without, opening a huge security hole, etc. Anyway, anyone have a comment on that idea of talking to a distant database server?
I mean, I'd be, coming from the web world, I'd be surprised that if people aren't. It's so easy to bring up an RDS instance on AWS, and you've got 99.99% uptime, and you don't have to worry about managing that MySQL server or whatever it is. I mean, it might only be in Dublin and my server's in Kent or whatever, but you're still going out you're still having to go over the internet, whether or not you've got a fast link or not. I'd be surprised if people aren't doing it. I'm surprised at the big jump between the US and China, but I'd be surprised if people aren't doing it.
Yeah, in fact, I'd like to talk about that someday. It's totally off topic here, though, so I won't bring it up again. But that's actually kind of an interesting case. Yeah, as far as what Matt says about, you're running an Asterisk server, you don't want to be running your database server on that same thing. So that I get, but it's probably going to be still in the same room, or at least on the same local network. Carl Fife has a question, but not the question. Carl.
Hi. So I started my career in Oracle database stuff. So my question is, the obvious use case for relational databases is for online transactional processing, recording states and call detail, et cetera, et cetera. Are you finding any use for analytical processing, like the so-called OLAP data mining stuff? I mean, are you using this sort of three-dimensional storage or multi-dimensional storage to do analytical processing on any of the data? Is that something you're finding and seeing in the wild?
Who is that question for?
Oh, I guess anybody who wants to take it, anybody with experience integrating relational databases in Asterisk.
I'll pass. So who wants to take that question? We can always refer to Matt, which is great. But does anyone else have a comment on that question? It's a good question.
All right. Were you specifically asking about in relationship to Asterisk, Carl?
Yeah, precisely.
Well, there's your answer.
Okay.
Exactly. Right.
All right. Let's defer to Matt and see if he has a comment. Matt is looking up OLTP like me. No, you said what it was. We know.
I could imagine you'd do that for for doing pattern analysis in calling. Like you want to see what times of days and what seasons and is the weather lined up with whether or not your call center is busy and so on. But that's just me kind of thinking in the abstract. I'd be curious. I was curious if anybody had seen anything in the wild that was actually actually in the wild being used.
Well, if you were going to do specific analytics on large data sets, you would in most cases not run them across any type of relational system itself. Generally, they get dumped into flat NoSQL kind of scenarios. If you look at Hadoop or a couple of the other systems that are floating around out there, but relationally, no. I mean,
but don't relational databases take take the table data and restore it clustered in all permutations of what's the word of dimensions that you could approach it from. In other words, you end up with n factorial of the dimensions, and then you end up with extremely high-speed analytical stuff while maintaining some of the benefits of relational architecture. I mean, it's just your traditional OLAP stuff. I mean, I know I haven't. What the stuff you're describing might actually work better for that. But if you've already got a transactional database, it seems like you'd have at least some ability to to gain some insight into that. That's something that would come to my mind. But anyway. But yeah, you're right.
I mean, there are companies that do BI against, of course, relational databases. I mean, generally it's an extraction routine though, and then they actually do the work. But I mean, there's lots of different ways to do things. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat, as we know.
Yeah, exactly right. And none of them are necessarily right.
Going off of what Jerry just said, I think that's probably why we in the Asterisk community don't hear a lot about it, is because from an Asterisk perspective, I mean, when you mention something like Hadoop, you're going really big data, right? I mean, you're not looking at just, I mean, you're not looking at a couple of instances of Asterisk. You're looking at like 1,000 instances of Asterisk over several years or a year to go mine that data.
Right.
And Asterisk isn't going to be writing to a NoSQL database at that point. I mean, because why go through all the pain? Go write it out to the relational database, then go mine the data and go put it into the data sets and go run your analytics on it. But that's all going to happen outside of what the Asterisk community is going to have visibility to in general.
Right.
I'd be I'm wondering how many people use other things other than relational databases. So who out there is using things like Mongo on Asterisk? Mongo can store non-relational data, and it's so fast. So if you've got an automated phone system and you're receiving millions of calls or whatever in the space of minutes, I wonder whether or not anyone's actually using NoSQL solutions as their database via Asterisk.
Great question.
Not that I've heard, but that doesn't mean it isn't happening. One of the interesting things, and I'm by no means a database expert or a database integration expert, but I do kind of read up and try to keep tabs on where things are going with things. And it's been interesting to watch the pendulum shift because, a couple, maybe 5-10 years ago, everybody was really focused on how do you integrate relational databases in with software. And so that's when you saw Hibernate come out and get integrated with Java and all these object relational mappers. And then people just said, well, why are we trying to map blobs of data when I just want the blob? I want to store the blob of data, but I'm going to want to extract the blob of data too. So then you saw the almost backlash against the object relational mappers, and everybody was just like, just store the data in a database, in a NoSQL database. It seems that there's almost that the pendulum might be shifting again, but I'm not entirely sure as to all the reasons why. And it certainly wouldn't be hard to go write an Asterisk real-time architecture backend that integrated with MongoDB or something like that. It's just nobody's really done it, and it's probably because so far it hasn't been the bottleneck in Asterisk. The data that we're pushing out, even if you look at something like call records, it's still a good chunk of data, but it's not constant. It's not just an absolute huge flow of data going in. So that might be why we haven't seen anybody try to write that as a backend yet.
Cool.
Well, the big issue is normalization versus denormalization, and the fact that data loses context in most relational databases, and that's where you see a lot of people moving. Specifically in the web space, where you'll see Cassandra or Couch or Mongo and lots of these other flat databases that are they're just key value stores. But the reason is because the data it retains its context. It's not lost once it basically gets shuffled off to 100 different tables inside of a relational database. And that's generally the mechanism that most people are using today to both increase performance attributes. One of the most I've done a few e-commerce sites in my lifetime, and one of the more current systems is one that's very popular is Magento. And the crazy thing is, Magento was renowned for being performance poor. It was primarily the relational database, and you basically have seen them move lots of that into NoSQL performance attributes, and it's made a significant difference. Can't be used for everything, but anyway, I don't want to defer off into a giant database discussion, but
actually we are in a giant database discussion, so that's not a problem.
Well, you want to kick up on that a little bit more. Have you guys seen Google Spanner yet? It's not NoSQL, but it's not SQL either. It's they're calling it NewSQL.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a cross between NoSQL and SQL.
Yeah.
And that's where we're seeing a lot of stuff go, where either people are just doing that outright, or they're doing things like throwing raw CDRs in MongoDB, extracting the data required to run billing and that kind of stuff, throwing that in traditional SQL Server, and then running reports and just linking them together when they need to extract additional data.
Well, the other part that kind of tended to move a lot of this is, when the migrate on the web specifically, because of the amount of data that has been generated now, one of the things was the fact that you were writing most dynamic sites in something like a PHP or a Java, or basically the fact that sites have now become primarily scripted, Python, Ruby, you can keep going. But bottom line is that the need for basically another syntax on top of another syntax became a pain in the butt. So the removal of SQL and getting direct query capability directly within Python or something without an object relational mapper or without some abstraction layer, that became a big deal, and that's why you did see the proliferation of i.e. the NoSQL systems, and it was primarily driven by the way sites are being built. It's all scripted.
Okay, there's quite a bit of chatter going on in the IRC. If anybody wants to join in and share, you're welcome
I need to pull up IRC.
Yeah, you do.
I've got a question for people in general. Do you think that the people connecting straight to databases will soon die from Asterisk, and instead people will be communicating with their databases over microservice APIs, RESTful APIs?
I think that's quite possible. I've just been looking at to see if there was an ODBC connector for MongoDB, so you could just use MongoDB straight in Asterisk anyway. But I think you're right. APIs, RESTful APIs, is the way that everyone's going with these things. It's all down to WebSockets and everything to do. Apache comes into everything these days, just about. So yes, I would say that's likely.
Well, let me throw this comment out there then. Where if I was doing a very specialized or a very complex integration of Asterisk in with my business, would I prefer Asterisk to be getting its configuration or to be pushing its real-time data directly into the database, or would I rather have it just present that to me, or I present to it JSON over a WebSocket? What would my preference be?
See, coming from the web world, I'd rather receive a post request or a WebSocket or something with JSON, and then I can deal with high load. I can deal with everything better. I can scale. Most of the time, people only have one Asterisk instance or whatever, and that deals with it. And the database can be the bad slow bit, depending on what you're doing. I'd much rather kind of farm that out into other scalable services that can deal with that data at that time, and whether or not it queues it up or whatever, and then eventually gets into the database. You don't care whether or not it gets into the database right there and then. You just want it in there.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm a big decoupling fan. So for me, I mean, anytime you can decouple systems, and specifically when you can use things like JSON move data freely between things, it makes a hell of a lot of sense. I mean, it's nothing more than a textual format, as everyone knows, and bottom line, who in the hell doesn't support it? It really comes down to the tool. I think what the real question is you know, what tool sets are freely available for you to use whatever kind of data integration, right? And obviously JSON has probably the widest array of tools floating around in pretty much every language. I mean, there's parsers for everything now from a JSON standpoint. So I mean, my preference would be that it would be decoupled that way, and it would be basically a JSON, you know, REST capability that I'd use. But you know, who knows? That's just my 2 cents.
Well, not to go back to the whole Asterisk 12 bandwagon of what we did, but that makes me feel pretty good about the sorcery framework. Then it isn't there now. I mean, there isn't a JSON data backend today, but the architecture easily allows for that. And from the perspective of Asterisk, it doesn't know that it's a JSON pipe over WebSockets feeding the data to it versus anything else versus a database, right? So it's certainly possible to write a module that would plug into it and do that. And from Asterisk's perspective, it's just CRUD operations. It's, you know, create, retrieve, update, delete, and that's all it cares about. So it'll be interesting to see if somebody picks that up and takes a look at doing something like that.
I guess that I'm slightly diverging, but while we're talking about talking to like APIs and whatever else, to be honest, I haven't tried this recently. How easy is it now in the dial plan to go and do like an HTTP request? Do you still have to go off and say I want to run a PHP script which will eventually do that and then pass that information back to the dial plan, or not? Because I know that you can kind of talk to a database in the dial plan. How easy is it now to kind of say I want to go off and do a GET request to an API and get back some data?
Well, there's always been func curl, so you can always use curl to just go run HTTP requests and get data. The real point though is that you're in the dial plan at that point. So you could go do that all in the dial plan, but then you're going to end up having to parse the response in the dial plan and do things like that as well in the dial plan. And there's just pros and cons to doing that. There are plenty of people who use curl in the directly in the dial plane to go do that, and I'm lost Dan there for a second. But I kind of go back and forth on that myself personally, and I think Life might disagree with me and some other folks. But if you're going to go do a whole lot of web interactions to go query data and do that data, and get that data and parse the data and manipulate it and then communicate that back into Asterisk, there's lots of various mechanisms to go do that might be easier to do that than do it directly in the dial plan. Go do it off in an AGI script, something like that. If you're going to go directly hit a web service from Asterisk.
Okay.
So I guess it's time to ask if there are any other questions. Great group today, and we encourage your questions. Francesco, do you have any questions for yourself, for example? What else can we hear about as far as, the bottom line is people need to come to Astricon to hear your talk, to meet Matt, and to meet everybody. Many of us are going to be there. There's a big VUC dinner. We won't get into the plugging of that yet, but soon. Allison Smith is going to be there. Yes, go ahead, Jerry.
Sorry, I got a question definitely for Matthew and anybody else that might be playing over at Digium or any other vendor. Have you guys been looking at? I mean, my latest greatest craze right now is basically Bluetooth Low Energy, and I'm curious about where that's going to play, and even maybe Michael has if he's on, has some thoughts about this. How BLE is going to play into both the presence space, proximity, all the rest of it, and if you guys are thinking about that at this point, because it's definitely an intriguing opportunity, and I'm trying to figure out how I might use Bluetooth Low Energy in Asterisk.
I'm not personally. That doesn't mean that there aren't people at Digium that aren't, but that's not something I've been looking at. I will say that on the VUC right now is the man who gave the talk on Chandongle, which may have some thoughts on that himself, however. And I think
that would be.
Can Jerry go over BLE a little bit? I'm a little unclear on how that relates to normal Bluetooth, especially in contrast to things like N-Ocean 315 megahertz energy harvesting wireless type setups and so on. I'd be very curious to.
I have little exposure to that as yet. Lots of use of Bluetooth, but not that low energy specifically.
I'm currently working with a company called Estimote. In fact, I'm waiting for my beacons to show up. But I just think it's an interesting place, especially in the presence. I'm trying to figure out how I'd use proximity beacons in a presence scenario, especially in an enterprise that might have a large Asterisk installation. So,
in other words, like an auto find me, follow me kind of an application.
Basically, I mean, it's that kind of scenario, basically. There's probably other ones. I just haven't thought of them. I mean, right now I'm looking at it from specifically just a mobile app implementation for retails or high-end hotels, that kind of stuff. But I've been trying to figure out how I might use that capability. Go check out Estimote if you're interested in this stuff. It's estimote.com. They got a little video, and it's primarily applying to retail and their use case, but it's I think this has widespread implications. This is iBeacon, by the way. This is what Apple is calling in iOS 7, what they call iBeacon, which is basically a protocol wrapper that makes it very easy to take advantage of Bluetooth Low Energy devices, or Bluetooth Smart is another label that gets applied to this.
Does it have its own profile, or is it part of another profile like Serial Protocol or some other?
Yeah, it's its own thing. It's its own thing. Yeah.
This is really a fascinating topic. I'd like to get into it in part 2 if you guys don't mind, because we can get into it in more detail, because it is interesting and I want to know more about it. But I want to ask, because Eric's with us, Eric Klein, and Eric is also presenting, and possibly this looks like it can go longer than 1 hour. No, not necessarily, Eric, because I'm going to get hungry and I need to eat. So
food is overrated.
And Matt may need to leave. So wanted to just get a little bit more general for a second while we have Matt and the folks in IRC from Digium and talk a little bit more about some of the other presentations as well. And Eric, you're going to be presenting there. Is Near coming, by the way, I think, from Greenfield?
Yes.
So what are you going to be talking about?
Okay, we've been working, actually, I've been working for the last 8 months with David Duffett on organizing a whole security masterclass track. Apparently they're putting us in the Chambers room. It now shows up on the website. So we will be covering a number of hands-on demos, starting with my intro to VoIP security. They know who you are and how to hack you, how to find you, how to harden your system. Then we're going to go through with a number of other people who will be part of this track. Philip Mullis, J.R. Richardson, Near, Flavio Goncala. I'm not even going to pronounce that right, so I'm going to skip. A couple of different people who will be talking 2 full days, nothing but Asterisk security. One of the things that we've got set up is Philip is going to try hacking a system, and Near is going to do some of the searching to see what was done and how it was hacked, and kind of show you hands-on, real-time, what happened. So it'll be a little bit of he's hacking and he's checking it, possibly a little bit of head-to-head work going on with that.
Sounds like a great idea. And for those I was just going to say, for those of you who have not been to previous Astricons, the security thing is really interesting. I mean, it's all interesting, but the security, well, especially with what we know now, right? But seriously, you know, even regardless of all of that, it's interesting. And J.R. Richardson did a thing last year. Was it last year or was it the year before? But there was I think it was he and Near who totally opposite viewpoints. But the point is, you're sitting there listening to 2 people who know what they're talking about argue about something amicably, and it's fascinating. It's because you get a lot of really good information, and you go look up all these things yourself and decide which side you want to take or which viewpoint you want to try to look at to make your own system secure. And speaking of fraud, Eric, you know something about fraud, and fraud can be extremely expensive. Can't you wake up overnight literally to like a $30K or a $50,000 loss? Isn't that true? Something like that?
Normal losses we're seeing for an overnight range to the $25,000 to $50,000. In Denver 2 years ago, we had somebody who actually got up and said, my company was hacked for over 2 days, $400,000.
Wow.
If you do a search on YouTube, we thought that wasn't a session being recorded, but apparently Tom Keating pulled out his iPhone and recorded it on us. And we're finding it's fairly common, the $25,000 to $35,000 session. But
I'm not
the JR Near session you're talking about from last year, they both came out on different sides of, is fail to ban really the only thing or the best thing you need? And more or less they seem to have finally agreed that fail to ban does what it's supposed to, but it doesn't do everything.
No, and that's for sure. I use it. It's excellent. It's an excellent tool. And for anybody listening who doesn't know what this is, fail to ban, FAIL, the digit 2 ban, fail to ban. Something you should look into. It looks at log files. It's great for all kinds of services, not just Asterisk, but very good for VoIP. Let me move on here because we're getting up to an hour, and I would like to hear from. Maybe briefly, by the way, Dan Jenkins, since you're presenting as well, and then we'll get over to Peter and talk about what he's going to be talking about. Dan Jenkins, you want to give us a little hint of what you're going to be doing?
Yeah, can do. I mean, we as a company have been using VoIP for coming up to 2 years now, and whenever you go out and try and find something that kind of graphs and shows you what's happening on your system right now in a nice, pretty web way, you always fail. There's nothing really out there that is completely and utterly real time using new technologies. So and scales quite well to how many people need to view this information. So I got fed up with that. And I mean, it's so easy to do now. I mean, I did a talk last year on connecting Node and Asterisk through the AMI. I'm going to expand on that a bit this year and show how easy it is to kind of use that connection, get data from it, pump that data out to a browser, and have nice real-time graphs, nice real-time kind of tables and things like that. I'm not going to give everyone the answers, all the answers, but hopefully I might be able to help some people with it. Yeah?
I have a very important question for you, Dan. Can you get us a deal on a trip to Madagascar? No, just kidding. Okay, let's move over to Peter. Peter, you prepared? Do you have a prepared statement to tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about? And then we're gonna close up, but possibly with a question. I'm not sure if our star questioner is ready for that. But Peter, give us a little preview.
Okay, well, there have been some great demos I've seen at recent conferences by David Duffett, where he's had WebRTC browser connecting to Asterisk. Of course, a lot of the time you don't connect the world directly to Asterisk. You often go through something like Kamailio first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate how to set up SIP over WebSockets on Kamailio and use that to front-end multiple Asterisk boxes. And I'll try and demo it live on a bunch of Raspberry Pis I've been setting up. I have 2 with Asterisk and 1 with Kamailio.
Live demos. We love live demos. I was trying to get Tim Patton on. He's probably busy or maybe in traveling or something. Wait a second. I'm hearing from Carl Fife, I think. Let me see. Do I have a... Yes, I have a question from Carl Fife. Just a second.
Oh, I thought you were going to play the intro. Sorry. I'll just ask the question. It's probably better anyway.
With a series of questions and sub-questions that may or may not be possible to answer. Take it away, Carl.
So you mentioned Raspberry Pi. I was wondering what kind of call carrying capacity you're getting in these little embedded Raspberry Pi devices.
Is that for me?
Yeah, sure. Anybody wants to take it.
Anyone who's doing the Pi, Ken
Anyone's
as
doing
well.
Yeah, exactly. And Raspberry Pi, is that RISC or is that x86?
Raspberry Pi is ARM v6.
It's ARM. Yeah. Okay.
In terms of me, I just use them for playing around with. So my call capacity is 1 at a time.
Yeah, I've actually used them for doing crypto conferences and using ZRTP and Free Switch Mod Conference. We've got about 4 people in there, fully secure, and then we start running out of CPU time. There's not a lot of CPU time on the Raspberry Pi, but for small office PBX playing around with, they're actually quite cheap and they work quite well.
What would you guess? Go ahead.
I mean, the only real problem you'll run into would be compile time. And that doesn't matter whether you're running Free Switch or Asterisk or whatever. The CPU is quite slow on it. And the disk access time is really horrific on it because they use SD cards. But it's a fun little platform to play with.
I see.
I'd actually echo exactly what Ken just said, because I run a Raspberry Pi at home, and it's about similar call load. Anything from Googling it, I see anywhere people saying from 4 calls to 10 calls max.
I see.
And certainly, Ken, I think you're on the edge of saying it at that point. But it's great for, if you're setting up like a little home system or just to play around with, it's fantastic. But yeah, I'd go to compile Asterisk and I'd come back 30 minutes later and it's still chugging through. So
that's funny. Can you compile it like say on a virtual machine, like a ESXi virtual machine or something like that, and then pipe the image or I don't know, just thinking out loud. You could create the binaries elsewhere and then copy them in.
They do actually have some KVM-based stuff that actually emulates the ARM.
I see.
But it's been my experience that it's not that much faster than compiling on the Raspberry Pi. However, the Raspbian project, which is a project to build a Debian-based distro for the Raspberry Pi, they actually found these binary-compatible boxes called the i.mx5, and the big bonus for those is they actually have SATA hardware built into them, so you can put decent hard drives on it, and that they've got like 4 of them that they build the entire distribution with in a cluster, and they're a bit more expensive than the Raspberry Pi, and if I recall correctly, they're about $150 a unit. But if you're building a lot like they are, it's probably well worth it because you can build the image there, and then just DD it out to your SD card and fire your Raspberry Pi up.
Mm-hmm.
And they work quite well. And they're supposed to be the i.MX6 out now, which is supposed to be about a 20% faster CPU.
I see. And the architecture of Raspberry Pi is such that, like, I know that the main CPU, can be used to service all kinds of interrupts that may or may not hold on to resources longer than they should. You have some serial port that's basically, hogging the entire CPU for some, not letting some other, time-sensitive thing happen. So, like, is the ARM architecture as implemented on Raspberry Pis, is that fairly friendly toward real-time applications like voice, or do you end up with, or is it just, is that why you can only get 4 calls out of it? Otherwise, you'd be able to get, 20 or something.
Well, the ARM processor on the Raspberry Pi was originally not designed for the Raspberry Pi. It was actually designed by Broadcom to be a set-top box, much like a Roku or something like that.
Yep.
So the amount of real estate on the die actually used for the ARM core is only about, I would say, and I'm just guessing here, probably 40 to 50% of the real estate. The rest of the real estate is actual hardware for doing things like H.264 and other video and audio codecs. Now you can gain access to those cores via licensing. It's literally about what it costs to buy G729 for Asterisk or FreeSwitch. It's like $10, and they start unlocking some of this functionality. And I haven't had a chance to play with that stuff yet, but there's some good reports of people doing things like XBMC and that sort of stuff, and using the decoding hardware on board. As far as the I/O on it, it actually offers a fair bit of I/O via good old-fashioned GPIOs, but it also supports I2C and SPI buses, and those are also capable of handling interrupts. So there's a fair bit of stuff you can do to it, and it's a really cheap platform. The other platform that's real promising along that lines is the BeagleBone Black, and which has a hotter CPU. It's only like $10 more in cost for a BeagleBone Black than the Raspberry Pi.
But it's also ARM.
Yeah, it's also ARM. It uses a later generation of the ARM chip, and it's the chipset they use is made by Texas Instruments. It's actually backed by TI. So it's a very interesting little platform also.
I think we are so far from the topic now that at this point.
Okay, I'll bring it around. I got one more question to bring around.
Oh,
so
okay.
So bring it right back to voice. I thought that I saw this website the other day. It was called Pony Express, as in PWN, IE Express, and there are all these embedded hacking devices, and it was very interesting that you could, take these little embedded systems like BeagleBone, Raspberry Pi, whatever, and just cram a whole hacking toolkit into it for owning somebody's network if you wanted to do some corporate espionage. And to that same idea, it seems like you could use a little widget like this to have an embedded Asterisk appliance that carries with it a supremely long pre-shared key that would essentially be the length of your entire phone call or more. In other words, if you use a random key and XOR your bit stream against a long pre-shared key, you have 100% uncrackable secure communications. And of course, the problem with setting up something like that is not having the appropriate bits on both ends of the call. But if you had the ability to create a standalone appliance that would hold everything from the from the call setup to the actual secure key itself, you could actually create a very, very interesting appliance that does secure communications but doesn't use like the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, which, as we know, has been compromised, or anything that uses one-way factoring, one-way hashing, all that kind of stuff, has apparently been hacked by NSA, etc. So you really could, in a sense, have convenient 100% secure communications, because you could pre-share a couple of gigabytes of pre-shared key, and in that you could talk for days, weeks, hours before you ever had to start from the top of your pre-shared key again.
Okay, We will be back in just a moment with the what we call the mature audiences version. So that means, Matt, you have to go. But in between time, we'll be chatting a little bit in a sort of an after show. But right now, what I'd like to do is end the recording, end the hangout. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to Andy Smith. Thanks to Dan Jenkins, Eric Klein, who's going to be presenting. Dan is also. Francesco Prior, our guest. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you'll join us.
Thank you.
Great to hear from you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again at Astricon. Jerry Schumann, you're not coming to Astricon, so I'll never forgive you, nor will I forgive Carl Fife, who never comes to Astricon.
Hey.
Ken Rice, I forgive for not coming, but you're not coming, so I won't see you. I will be seeing Matt Jordan, though. Thanks, Matt. It's great to have you always. Thank you very much for coming. Peter Dunkley, we've seen enough of you. You're like David Duffett. You know, we can take it or leave it. But all kidding aside, thank you, everybody, for joining the VUC. We love you, folks. This is a great community, and we are out of here, but we're going to stay around for a big-time mature audiences only.
No routing tables were corrupted during this edition of the VoIP Users Conference. Also, IP, communications, and VoIP on Google Plus Communities. Thanks for staying. VUC.me is the address on the web. VUC.me/live if you're interested in watching the videos. Very often they're demos, so you would gain by watching them. Our thanks to Simwood, simwood.com. OnSIP.com, our hosted PBX for the last several years. ZipDX.com, the fantastic, full-featured, full-color, wideband SIP conference server. And to VoxPhone.com for the 48 local rate dial-ins. See you next time.
And that's all she wrote. And